Yes, welcome in. Badgers still in the process of adding to their roster, and we got a couple more guys to talk about, Jesse, since the last time we did a show. We've also got a little bit of coaching news to talk about that came out over the weekend with Kenny Guiton reportedly on the move from wide receivers coach to quarterbacks. You published your full Too Deep for the offense last Friday, correct?
I did.
Yeah, we'll go through that. We went through the wide receivers because that was the most, I think, not noteworthy, but the most uncertainty of all the spots that we looked through. And, you know, there's also some uncertainty other places on the offense. We'll talk about that as well. And we'll also hit on the Penn State press box coming down, which was a great sight to see for anybody that's ever been in the press box at Penn State, which is very few of the people that are watching this. So maybe we won't hit on it too much, but we'll at least talk about it. All right, before we get into anything, as usual, as always, I should say, Home Field Apparel is the official apparel sponsor of the camp. They have the best vintage gear you can possibly find anywhere. You can check them out at homefieldapparel.com. Use the promo code Bucky24 for 15% off your first purchase. All right, let's jump into this with the news of Kenny Guiton moving from wide receivers coach up to quarterbacks coach. I mean, let's be fair about this. He was a quarterback in college and has coached mostly wide receivers, but has dabbled a little bit with quarterbacks. We saw that at the end of this year when Phil Longo was fired, that they kind of put the two rooms together, and Kenny was kind of coaching both spots there, I guess. But it is, I know that there were a lot of names out there that people were throwing out, and there was even some reports out there, but they end up going with Kenny Guiton just to promote him. I like Kenny Guiton. I think he feels like he's a good teacher. I know the wide receivers seem to, warm to him pretty quickly. Quarterback's a different beast, but he certainly has experience at least playing the position. And as we know, it doesn't necessarily take somebody that's played the position to coach it, just like it doesn't mean if you've coached it, you can play it, I guess.
Yeah. I'm intrigued by how long it took to make this hire and behind the scenes, whether there were other people pursued. But obviously, Luke Fickell has had tremendous, praise for Kenny and respect for him for a long, long time. He was the quarterback at Ohio State when Luke was on staff there. They recruited him out of high school. And I do think that matters here in terms of the knowledge of the position. It's one thing to be coaching running backs with an offensive line background, which we've seen previously.
When did that happen?
In the recent past, may have happened at Wisconsin. Maybe it happened somewhere else. It escapes me.
Literally my favorite part of asking like Braylon Allen, what can Al Johnson teach you about playing running back? And it's like, well, I guess he can help with the pass blocking. But yeah, Al Johnson was a good guy. Like, I don't think anybody disliked Al Johnson. It was just, it's a questionable hire. Or a question. It was a questionable hire.
Yeah, I'm not going to sit here now and say it's an absolute home run hire because we haven't seen what a quarterback room looks like with Kenny Guiton other than the last 2 weeks of the regular season, which was born out of necessity and hard to say whether it changed the results. I know they played pretty well as an offense against Nebraska. In the week leading up to that game, I think Kenny earned some widespread praise from players. The problem is the players who were talking are all gone because they're all in the portal. Braden Locke was talking about how good the mesh had been. CJ Williams was talking about what it was like to work with both groups. And of course, those guys are long since gone. But Guiton does present as someone whose energy is infectious. We saw it when he's out at practice and when you talk to wide receivers. So I do think that this was a decision that makes some sense based on where we're at right now.
Yeah, and again, when you mentioned that you wonder if there were some other guys, like if it took this long, there were clearly some other guys. Like if this was the move that you had off the jump that you were going to make, you would have made it right away, right?
I would think
so. It's not like you have to. There's not a whole lot involved there. Now, again, does that mean like Kenny Guiton was his 6th or 7th choice? I don't think so. But I think it's, and again, when we get an opportunity to chat with Luke Fickell and get to ask about his offensive coordinator that was hired almost a month ago, and some of the other pieces to this offseason, we're able to ask him that and get a better look, a clearer look, as opposed to just talking to people behind the scenes here. I think it's pretty obvious that there were other people, but I don't think Kenny Guiton was just like okay, well, we don't have anybody else, so we're going to move him up. I don't think that was the case at all.
No, because this position is too important, and it's something Luke has talked about before. He mentioned earlier this offseason about the value of hiring a quarterbacks coach and having it separate from the offensive coordinator, which we saw under Phil Longo the last 2 years. They did both those things. This is the first time Wisconsin has had a true quarterbacks coach since John Budmeyer left 4 or 5 years ago. But he said that it's a model that is more like the NFL, where now in college you don't have to have a limit on the number of coaches you can have on the field, and that being able to develop that room specifically is so significant, because when you had an OC / quarterbacks coach, what percentage of his time is spent working with other groups? 50, 60, 70% in certain situations is how Luke talked about it. So this is really important, and even more so when you consider where quarterback play has been for Wisconsin. So I do think that Kenny's knowledge of the wide receiver group will help, because he's been doing this now for a long, long time at 4 different schools as a wide receivers coach. Obviously, he had a brief stint at Arkansas where he was the interim offensive coordinator as well. But I think that perspective can help quarterbacks in what is a wide receiver trying to do. And obviously his background actually playing the position in college will go a long way here.
So that was one of them. But then obviously Jack Cooper, the new safeties coach, who does have experience, or I should say he was here at Wisconsin. He was a defensive analyst or senior analyst this past year, and also an assistant defensive back coach, was the defensive coordinator at Rhode Island before coming here. So Jack Cooper takes a spot vacated by Alex Grinch, who went down to be the safeties and the defense coordinator down at UCF under Scott Frost.
Well, it shows that Luke has a lot of trust in people that show him, what they're capable of, because these are now back-to-back internal hires, and interested to see what Cooper does with this group, because this is going to be the 4th safeties coach in as many seasons for Wisconsin. There was Jim Leonard, and then you had Colin Hitchler, who's now out of a job after spending 1 season at Alabama. Obviously Alex Grinch, and now we've got Jack Cooper. At least he's got some understanding and knowledge of the personnel here, which does matter, because just because this is his first year as the full-time safeties coach doesn't mean it's his first year here. He knows the group that he's working with, and we'll hopefully have a chance to talk to him and some of these other new coaches in the coming weeks.
Yeah. What's funny is that he actually worked for Scott Frost at Nebraska, and actually I think at UCF as well, which is kind of funny a little bit, little small world type of stuff there. But yeah, I don't know a ton about Jack Cooper. I'm just be honest, like being fair about that. Looking forward to learning more about him, just and getting a chance to talk to him, because we haven't had that opportunity yet. But the fact that Colin Hitchler is out of a job after 1 year, and it's not like Alabama was horrible by any stretch on the defensive side of the ball, perhaps not up to their standards, I don't know. But I mean, that's he's going to find a place, because he's a great recruiter for sure. But the fickleness of, and that's not to use obviously Luke Fickell, but the fickleness of college football. I mean, the dude, boom, 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 and then boom. And I don't know where he's going to end up. He's going to probably end up a good spot, but that sucks for him.
Yeah, I would say so. Not that I think he ever would have been able to come back to Wisconsin, but it is just sort of interesting that Wisconsin fills its safety coach's role before that happens again. I think that you make that move and you leave after 1 season, I mean, you're not going to come back. But he was a very good recruiter here, no question about it. We talked about it ad nauseum with the ties that he had on the East Coast and the types of players that he was able to bring in. And I think that alone, in addition to your coaching acumen, is going to get you your next job.
Yes, it will. And I'm sure he'll certainly find a job pretty easily, you would think, just simply based on the recruiting. And again, Wisconsin's safeties are pretty good in the 1 year that he was here. So it's a fickle business. Moving on, the transfer portal continues to hum for Wisconsin as they pick up a couple of more guys on the defensive side of the ball. The first one that came through, and you can tell me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, but is it Javier Suggs?
I think it's Javier Suggs. Yeah.
Javier Suggs. Okay. All right. He commits. He was at LSU. Previous to that, though, he was at with Matt Mitchell down at and I guess Nazir Forkrane down at what is it, Grand Valley? Grand Valley State. So here's the thing: Wisconsin was after him the last time he went in the portal, ended up at LSU, and he ended up being the backup to Gio Paez, who obviously Wisconsin fans know the name, but you go and look at his numbers. You go and look at Paez's numbers. Paez played a lot more snaps than he did. Suggs' numbers, not significantly, but they were better than his. And I know that LSU fans were a little, not ticked, but would have rather have seen Suggs get a little more playing time than Gio Paez.
I've been really fascinated by the defensive overhaul, but specifically along the defensive line this offseason. We knew coming into the portal season that was going to be probably the most important position defensively. Now, cornerback, it turns out, has become pretty important to add because of the number of guys that they've lost. But Suggs is now the 5th defensive lineman that they've added from the portal. And I think 4 of those 5 are generally considered to be interior players. We know that Luke Fickell said before that he felt like they were a bit undersized on the interior. They needed to get bigger. This is all part of that plan. You look at the 5 guys they've added, and other than Michael Garner, the guy from Grambling, Suggs played the fewest snaps last season. But he does have those 2 years at Grand Valley State to fall back on, where he had 14.5 sacks and was a really high-level player. Maybe he didn't get the snaps or opportunities that he wanted at LSU, finished with 10 tackles, but I think he can be a real difference maker here with his 1 year of eligibility left at Wisconsin. When you just consider who's left, like, it's a completely different defensive line group basically next season. They've got, as of now, and this is assuming that the guys we think are going to be defensive linemen are there, because maybe some are edge, but I think it's so far they've got like 2 edge guys and 5 D linemen, but 11 scholarship defensive linemen. 3 of those guys were on the roster last season: Dylan Johnson, Brandon Lane, and then Ben Barton is going to be back. He told me that he'll be back for a 6th season. So other than that, it's all new with the 5 portal guys and the 3 freshmen they're bringing in. And so Barton's really the only one out of the 3 coming back that played significant snaps. Dylan Johnson played a handful as a reserve, and I think he'll certainly get more. But there is ample opportunity from this group, and I think Suggs has an opportunity to take advantage.
You wrote about him, right? Or you are writing about him, I should say.
I'm working on a story for Tuesday on, in general, just the defensive line overhaul. I haven't had a chance to talk to Suggs, but have had a chance to talk to 3 of those guys, including Parker Peterson from Tulane, Charles Perkins from UT Martin, and Corey Walker from Western Michigan. The 2 I haven't talked to is the 2 I just mentioned, Suggs and Garner, but it's just a totally different group with guys that at least have experience at the college level and have been fairly productive. Corey Walker played against Wisconsin this past season in the season opener. So, and I think Perkins, I mean, he was an FCS All-American a couple of years ago. They may not be proven at the Power 4 level, other than Suggs coming from LSU, but these are guys that have productivity at lower levels.
Well, I think it feels like that stands out a lot across a lot of these guys that they're bringing up. We talked about it with wide receivers, Mark Hamper especially, coming up from a smaller school. And certainly, I mean, big time production with the tight end too, with Koziel. So coming from the MAC. So you have a bunch of guys that are coming up a level that have significant production at that level. And I kind of prefer that than taking guys from Power 5 schools that were really big time recruits that maybe haven't necessarily stood out or gotten the opportunities or taken advantage of the opportunities that they were given. I kind of prefer, if you're going to bring a guy in, especially like a 1-year guy, you would take a guy that has proven production, even if it is at a lower level. We saw that with Elijah Hills, and maybe we haven't seen it with Brandon Lane yet. He's got another year, but I don't know how you feel about that. I kind of appreciate, or not approve of, but just prefer to see guys that have had proven production be up here, as opposed to just trying to fit really, really talented players in there and say, hey, go try and be the guy that everybody thought you were coming out of high school.
Yeah, I think I prefer that methodology as well. It's not that guys that say like a Jaden Ballard can't come here and earn a starting spot or be a major contributor. But again, he's got 11 receptions in 4 seasons at Ohio State. Granted, that's the best wide receiver room in the country year over year. but you got a Mark Hamper who did it on the field last season, and maybe that can give you some confidence. That seems to generally have been the strategy here this offseason and really the last two. It doesn't mean it's an across-the-board situation. I mentioned a guy like Ballard, Tyrese Fearbury, the outside linebacker coming from the SEC in Kentucky. So it's a mix and match, but you want to be able to say this is what someone did in college and this is how it will fit here, as opposed to here's what somebody did 3 or 4 years ago. But like we've said before, you just never know what that's going to look like at a given position. They just have to do the best they can with the film that they have. And I think I've mentioned before, I think part of this to me stems from maybe what the market is offering some lower level guys. But I would also say it's not like these lower level guys aren't getting offers from major schools. I go back to this story that I'm working on for Tuesday on these defensive linemen, guys that are coming from different levels. All the Power 4 schools were on their visit list. Parker Peterson was considering Notre Dame, Auburn, USC. A lot of these guys had schools just like that. So it's not just like you're going and getting people for less money necessarily, but that has to be a factor in this process when you weigh it against somebody who had a lot of success at the Power 4 level already.
Yeah, I'm not going to look, the smaller school guys coming up, it's not always going to be the way that you think it's going to be. Like John Pius probably didn't have the impact that we thought he was going to have. And you could say the same thing about Darian Varner a couple of years ago coming up from Temple. Like it didn't work. And that's life. But I think you've seen other, like how many guys from Power 5 schools coming here have ended up, or Power 4 schools, I guess now, have made an impact? I mean, Tyree Walker's one, obviously. But, and I'm not talking about quarterbacks, even though I don't even know you would say quarterbacks made an impact in a positive light, especially this season. But I mean, who are some of the other guys that have come in and made plays? I mean, Jason Maitre, maybe.
There's not a ton, but also the majority of the guys that they've gotten have not necessarily been Power 4. In the 2 previous off seasons that Fickell and his staff came here, you look at someone like a Jackson McGowan who came from LSU, but again, that's somebody who spent a year in a program that was Power 4 and didn't play, and maybe needed some room for development. So yeah, it just depends on the player, but obviously this was part of the strategy very early on, which we saw in the first couple of days of the portal window. When you looked at what types of players were they offering, a lot of it was FCS level guys and perhaps even some D2. But that's part of this process in general, the way they've approached it.
So they also added to the cornerback room since last time we did a show, Deone Hill, who played at Miami this past year, but was also at Marshall. Not huge numbers by any stretch. 1 interception in his career, 11 pass breakups, but do we think him and Xavier Lucas are like 2 ships passing in the night?
I was going to joke that maybe this is the player to be named later in whatever happens with Xavier Lucas. I suppose we're still waiting to see on that. They needed experience. They needed bodies in the cornerback room. And he did start, I think, 5 games at Miami this past season and was very productive at Marshall the previous couple years. So again, hard to judge with any of these guys on what the fit is going to look like, but just look at the numbers in the cornerback room. This is now the 2nd cornerback they've added out of the portal. Feels like they're not quite done yet because they need more numbers. Jameer Latimer was the other one coming up from the FCS level like we're talking about. You have multiple young guys with no experience. And then is Ricardo Hallman going to make an announcement on his future? So, they kind of need him.
He's still got time, right? Like, see, this is the problem with, or I shouldn't say the problem, but this is kind of the thing with not having a bowl game is like, it feels like everything had to be done right after the season when you have a bowl game. This one, not as much, but a lot of the guys that were going to the draft declared before the bowl game in recent years, specifically Wisconsin. I know that he is enjoying himself just based on his social media. I believe I saw him in Great Smoky Mountains this past weekend, I think with Daryl Peterson. So they're enjoying themselves. You ever been to the Great Smoky Mountains?
I have not.
It's a fantastic place. You should get down there. It's amazing. Went down there in May of last year. Just black bears just roaming around all over the place. You could go around a corner and there's one just right there. Some great waterfalls. You should do it. Just do it. Do it. But I don't know. Like, I don't know exactly where that's at. It must be a tough decision, or else you would have already done it, right?
I would think so. I think the challenge too is 2 seasons ago was such an unbelievable year where you have 7 interceptions. And then this past season, for the longest time, people weren't really throwing at him. I don't think he's a worse player now, but there were also some situations where he probably would have liked to have some plays back. And so I don't know if you submit your information to the NFL Draft Advisory Board, they give you different levels of, we think you're a day one or day two, or you should go back to school. And I don't know what kinds of conversations those were, but maybe he feels that if another year in college would help him, that's the decision that you make.
Yeah, and I believe that the deadline to enter is January 25th. That's the last time I think I looked at it the other day, I thought it was January 25th. So we still got time here before you actually have to make a concrete decision. But certainly Wisconsin's workouts start before that. And not that that matters. Chucky Hepburn was going through Wisconsin workouts before he ended up at Louisville. So, but like for you, we don't know anything, but is it either Wisconsin or the NFL? Do you think?
Oh, I would think so. I would think so.
Okay.
What's the alternative? I mean,
no, I mean, like, I wonder if like if he was having those thoughts. Obviously, the portal's closed now; it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But I just wonder if like people were coming at him the way that we've heard other people coming at not just Wisconsin players, but everywhere, players that are not in the portal. We had Jim Mora Jr. just going off like, "You come after my players, we know who it is. We're going to come after you, and expose you, whatever the hell that is." So, yeah. What do you think? Just yes or no, back or no?
I'll say he's back. I'm sure 10 minutes after we record, he'll say something in the opposite direction. But I just not hearing anything at this point makes me believe that maybe he comes back. I don't know.
I just don't. I mean, I guess if he's coming back, what are you waiting for?
I don't know.
Are you waiting for? No. Like, are you waiting? But it goes the same way. It goes the other way, I should say. If you're leaving, what are you waiting for? And because like a lot of guys are already working out at their places where they need to be. And I'm not saying that it couldn't be doing that and we're just not seeing it, but this is about the time that these guys go off to Arizona or Florida or wherever California, wherever the camp is, or wherever the training place is that you want to go to, and get after it for the next 2 months. Come back for your pro day, and then go on your visits and go into the draft. So the timing is just interesting. Again, we're spending about 10 minutes on this, and as you said, it'll probably come out 10 minutes after we're done recording. But I just don't have a great feel for the timing, other than maybe still holding out for a little bit more money. I don't. We're speculating, know. Jesse. We're speculating. I know you don't like to speculate without facts.
Yeah.
Which then means it's not speculating. But I think he's back. I do. Which would be huge because you get then three of your five starters back in the secondary, along with Preston Zachman and Austin Brown, wherever you want to put Austin Brown, whether it's in the slot or at safety. He was essentially a starter by the end of the year, having replaced Max Lofi in the slot. So it's a good base. And then you can add to it with the guys that you brought in from the portal, whether you have somebody else playing safety and you put Austin Brown at the nickel. And then the corner spot is obviously going to be up for grabs and guys fighting for that. I don't know who that's going to end up being, but I like some of the pieces they have at least competing for it. I'd have no idea if they're going to match what Nazir Forkerine did this year. And I think he was highly underrated as a player for Wisconsin, especially this year. Didn't have a great last year, but I think he was pretty darn good this year. And he got so many balls thrown his way because teams were not, at least initially, going after Ricardo Hallman. So very underrated player, I think Nazir Forkerine was at Wisconsin.
Yeah, especially what he did this past season when he had some extra time to recover from, the illness that he had, which didn't allow him to really do workouts going into his junior season. I would also say, just in that cornerback room, Jay Harper and Emilio Agard have not had much discussion here because we didn't see him this past season. But look who's left. The answer is basically nobody, and maybe they would have risen up anyway. But those are two guys that are going to be in the mix here as well after having 1 year in the program. And Agard, we're talking about Colin Hitchler, another one of those guys that he was able to get on the East Coast, a 4-star prospect who had a lot of great offers. I think even though he doesn't necessarily fit the bigger 6'2", 6'3" corner mold, will be in the mix here this season.
Yeah, and again, while Nizier worked out, none of the other tall guys that they yet, none of the tall guys that they brought in necessarily have panned out. But again, it's very early with Raphael Dunn being on the back end, or I should say at safety, and then you have Remington Moss coming in, who's another big body as well. Still plenty of time. I guess I shouldn't even said that because it's like one guy essentially. Amari Snowden didn't work out for them for whatever reason. Do you think they are like, again, this is unfair, and because we've done this the last couple of years, it's hard to make a judgment, but are they going to be better up front than they were this year?
Well, it's certainly something I've been thinking about and trying to put this story together. I think they can't be worse. I mean, I was looking at the numbers. I didn't realize how bad it was from an impact standpoint. Like I knew it was not good. I think we all watched what happened. They gave up 165 yards rushing a game, was 91st in the country, and it was the worst mark Wisconsin has had since 2005. But you look, and in, I think, sacks per game, they were like 118th nationally. Where do you think they rank in tackles for loss per game this past season?
How many schools are in the FBS?
134.
133.
134. They were dead last in the country in tackles for loss. I did not realize that until I started putting this story together. And the three guys that are coming back didn't record a single tackle for loss. Now, I mean, Barton did some good things. He had 5 pass breakups, which as a defensive lineman to rank tied for second on the team in that category, pretty good. Led the team in fumble recoveries and all that. But you need more of these types of guys that you're bringing in that can be impactful. And so what I'm saying is it is a pretty low bar. And I look at those 5 guys, and obviously they've got, Antaron Turner, the inside linebacker from Western Carolina. They've got 2 edge guys. That's 8 new transfer portal players in that front. A lot of guys that have productivity. And while it's impossible to say what it's going to look like, it's got to be better than it was this past season.
Well, it's funny you say that, because when we talk about the backup quarterback, and Mabry can't be worse than Braden. I mean, he could have been. The defense, you're right. I don't know if it could be worse. Like, I guess giving up 185 yards a game on the ground would be worse, but the lack of impact from the guys that they brought in last year, or the guys that returned, just not good enough. And, those guys are, I mean, John Pius is probably going to maybe get into an NFL camp, maybe. Leon Lowry's at Illinois. Kurt Neal's at Illinois. I certainly would have liked to have seen James Thompson Jr. play this year and play healthy, because what we saw from him in 23 was production, even on a small scale, especially for a defensive line. I mean, for a defensive lineman in Wisconsin, it was pretty good. But like in the grand scheme of things, it wasn't like a huge impact. But them not having him was significant. And now he's going to be down in Illinois, and I'm sure he'll play well because he's a good player. But they had to do something to reshape that room and give it a little bit more oomph. And we'll see if it is. I'm, again, in the let's wait to see what it looks like. But if I'm forced to say this right now, as you said, it can't be worse. Like, production-wise, it can't be worse than it was this year.
Yeah. And of these 5 guys, I feel like the long-term developmental guy would seem to be, to me, Garner, because he didn't have a ton of productivity at Grambling. He's got 3 years of eligibility left. I think he was like 235 pounds coming out of high school. Now he's up to 280 plus. But some of these other guys just have 1 year of eligibility left. 3 of those guys have 1 year of eligibility left. And that's in Elijah Hill's type situation. There are ample snaps available on the interior. And a lot of these guys were brought in, from what they told me, to be run stuffers. Like, that is Peterson's specific role. And so I would expect them to be better than last year, but what does that even mean given where we're coming?
I can't watch a defense give up run yards like that again.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not even just a Wisconsin defense. It's just defense in general. When you can't stop the run, it is the most soul-sucking thing for I think a coach, because like if you can't stop the run, then you're constantly in second and short or second and manageable, and then you're third and short. And Wisconsin was always, it felt like always in that situation, especially against the better teams, namely Penn State. It felt like every single Penn State like drive, especially after Prebula got in there, was like 3rd and 3. And it's just so easy to convert because they were getting so many yards on first down because they couldn't stop the run. We know this. It's the same way for every single defense that's ever stepped on a field. Stop the run on 1st and 2nd so you can get after the quarterback on 3rd. And that was obviously what Wisconsin did such a good job of under Dave Aranda, under Justin Wilcox, and except for 1 year under Jim Leonard. And it allowed them to look like geniuses on 3rd down because they had a lot to, and I'm not saying they weren't geniuses, they're fantastic defensive coaches, but it allowed them to get after the quarterback because they had done the job on 1st and 2nd down. And they just did not do the job on 1st and 2nd down last year. My other question is, I don't know that Mike Tressell's defenses have ever really been great at stuffing the run.
Well, yeah. I mean, this also goes back to what do they have off the edge too? Because like we've talked about, and we talked about it during the season, what made some of those defenses special? Yeah, you had some really good defensive linemen, but you had guys who were difference makers off the edge. And I don't know if they have that now. I don't really know. Mason Riger is somebody they brought in from Louisville. I mentioned Fierbury from Kentucky. They've got some pieces there. They return a couple inside linebackers that you would expect to be starters, or if not, certainly the 2 deep guys with Tackett Curtis and Christian Allegro. But you need those guys to be better playmakers. So it's got to be all the way around. And I'm also interested to see what exactly is the structure of this defense. Is it really just you want some bigger bodies and that's all you're going to do here? Or are you going to make some changes because you saw what you did this past season didn't work? You know, I think of Charles Perkins, a guy from UT Martin. He played in a 3-3-5 defense there. Is that something we'll see, which we really haven't seen from Mike Tressel in these 2 seasons? Will they put more defensive linemen on the field? I don't know what it's going to look like. I guess the good news for Wisconsin is they've got a heck of a lot more options than they did maybe a week into the portal when they were losing guys and didn't have any bodies.
I don't know how much of this was just strictly fewer snaps. You'd be able to tell me that because you have those numbers. But the production drop off for Darrell Peterson was just off the charts. I mean, the dude had 10 tackles for loss and 4.5 sacks in 2023. He had one tackle for loss and 1 sack in 2024. That is just dramatic. And again, there was a lot more snaps. He played a lot more snaps. I feel like it's a feel. I'm going to do my thing here and just keep on talking until you find it. But he probably played more snaps because they just didn't have other guys that they counted on. That's why CJ Getz played so many snaps and all that good stuff. But like this past year, he was a non-factor, which is just crazy because that's not who we saw that's not who we saw growing up. And it's not who we saw in 2023. So I feel like him back in 2025, he's got something to prove for sure. And I'm also intrigued to see Thomas Heiberger as well, who we got to see very early in fall camp. And it felt like maybe he was going to be a guy that maybe was going to make some plays. And then obviously the injury popped up. Same thing or not the same thing, but you also have Aaron Witt as well.
So you talked long enough for me to find it. I'm looking at the Pro Football Focus numbers. This past season, he played, according to them, 458 defensive snaps. And then in 2023, he played 554 defensive snaps. So, yeah.
So not really. So like 100 more snaps?
100 fewer snaps this past season. But they also utilized him much differently, which has to do with it.
Sure. They had his hand on the ground a lot more, which is going to limit you. But when you're a pass rusher, because most of those opportunities, again, this is anecdotal, and I'm not going to sit here and say I know exactly the numbers he played with his hand on the ground and standing. But when you're a pass rusher on the interior and you're being asked they're putting him in there because they think his speed and his explosiveness is going to be a problem for an offensive line, and it wasn't, right? just based on the stats. Based on the stats, it wasn't. So I'm interested if they're going to continue to have his hand on the ground, or if they're bringing some of these other bigger guys in so that they don't have to put his hand. So he is not going to be that guy. But we know with your conversation with Leon Lowry that was kind of what they were going to do with him, and him and Daryl Peterson have very similar body types. So maybe they're going to throw Leon Lowry in there and be like, hey, Daryl, you can actually rush the passer on the outside. I don't know. I have no idea what that was going to be.
I mean, they do have more D lineman bodies on scholarship this year than they did a year ago. I think they had 9 going into last season on scholarship. So they're getting a variety of guys. I like Peterson is a zero technique, nose up over the center. Some of these other guys, they're interior, but they say they play like 3 technique, and some are 5 where they can line them up on the defensive as a defensive end. So I think they've got a lot of different options with the people that they have, but certainly you would think a guy like Peterson, if you're looking at the 2-year sample size, where was he most impactful? Maybe you can have someone else play that spot so he can rush the passer, because he can do it. Yeah. He can do it pretty well.
Yeah. And I don't know that we ever spoke about it, but like Ernest Willard Jr., was he going to be moving back outside? Do we know?
I don't think we've had that conversation right now, but I would also say, with the number of people they've brought in, I mean, are you going to move him back to the D line?
They moved him outside because the injuries in fall camp. I guess I didn't look at the warm-ups against Minnesota and see where he was, but again, there are a lot of questions that I have right now as a result of what they've done in the portal and a result of what they've done with the coaching staff. And, hopefully we'll get some of those answered here in the next few weeks or so leading into winter workouts. And then obviously spring ball coming up here in a little bit. Were you saying something else? I think I cut you off.
I don't think so.
No. All right. I know we talked about a few other things before the show. They're now blanking because I didn't write them down. Was there anything else that we wanted to hit on?
Well, we don't have to go over the offensive too deep. We can hit on it quickly. And I don't have much to say about the Penn State press box other than good riddance.
That was just the biggest piece of crap ever. And I believe you've been to every press box now.
I think there's 2.
Oh, Washington and UCLA, or no, Washington and Oregon.
Have not been to Washington and Oregon. I guess technically UCLA's at the Rose Bowl. So yeah. Right.
You've been to that one.
Fortunate for that one. Never been to Maryland somehow.
Okay. Better than Penn State.
Yeah, that might be it.
And you've been to Rutgers.
Yes. So
yeah, okay. And Rutgers wasn't bad. It wasn't horrible.
No.
It's not like state of the art, but Penn State's was by far. Like you saw, I don't know if anybody hasn't seen the video. If you go and look for the video, it's just like this big wooden thing just falling down to the ground. It was honestly, that was the only thing that had not been touched at that stadium in the last 60 years, which was very, very similar to Wisconsin until before the 2023 season, when they redid the whole south end zone thing. They also redid the press box, and it's now very nice and has air conditioning and heat, and it's it's great, much better. Penn State and Wisconsin were neck and neck there for a bit in terms of the worst press box in the Big Ten. And now Wisconsin's not up there. I don't even know who would take the mantle at this point.
I need to think it through. Maybe that's a topic for the offseason with all these. I'm sure everybody is just dying to know our thoughts on press box rankings, but it's a long offseason.
It is. I don't want to dive into all the hot topics right away.
Yeah. Can't give it away.
Yes. All right. So the depth chart real quickly, or not real quickly, but quickly. Mm-hmm. Quarterback. You've got Billy Edwards as your starter and Danny O'Neal as the backup. Carter Smith have any chance to be the backup, winning that backup job?
I just think it's so hard to do when you're coming from the high school level. And the difference this year is Wisconsin has a backup that has been a full year starter at the FBS level in San Diego State. To me, I'm more intrigued by, are they going to add another scholarship quarterback? Because it is based on history at Wisconsin. I don't remember a season where they went into a year with just 3 scholarship quarterbacks, because you want to have one per class.
Wouldn't it have been like your first year?
Oh yeah, I guess 2011.
Because Bud Meyer got hurt
by injury, right? But that's because of injury at a different time a different era where you couldn't
Who was
go
the
get people.
who was the
Joey
freshman?
Brennan was the backup that year.
Who was the freshman that year?
Joey Brennan.
He was a true freshman, right?
I believe so.
So that was Russell Wilson, John Budmeyer, Joey Brennan.
Well, Kurt Phillips had the ACL, right? So
yeah, that's right.
I don't know when he got hurt. The point is, it doesn't happen very often. So I don't know what's going to happen there. But as it currently stands, I think it feels pretty obvious to me, just based on what we know about these guys. You don't bring in a guy like Edwards with 1 year of eligibility left unless he's presumably going to be your starter.
So you have at running back Darian Dupree as a starter, which I think completely makes sense based on what we saw this year. The backup is not. I'm not saying it's interesting, but there are some Cade Giacomelli fans that aren't going to be impressed with your choice of Dylan Jones there.
I just
think the dude averaged over 8 yards a carry.
I am familiar. I have heard that at various points. And I made sure to put in there that he's certainly going to be in the discussion there for the rotation. I think what we saw of Dylan Jones in stretches, in practice, and even breaking off a nice run in a limited opportunity that he got late in a game makes me believe that he's going to have a shot to be the backup. And I would also think you don't stand pat at running back unless you have a lot of belief, I think specifically in those two guys. Maybe the new staff, whoever it is going to feel differently about Giacomelli, though you still have Devin Spalding as the running backs coach. But they only have 5 scholarship running backs, which is a pretty small number based on what we've seen. They had 7 going into last season, obviously lost to Wee Walker and Ches Malusi, and didn't get anybody in the 2025 class because, again, they felt like they were in a pretty good spot having 3 scholarship guys when you throw in Gideon Atuka in the 2024 class. So I think it's because they're banking on some of those younger guys, but absolutely Giacomelli is going to be in the conversation. Head scratching to me that he couldn't even get a carry over the last 5 games during a 5-game losing streak. I don't care whether you want to shorten the rotation. It's not like you were winning games with what you had.
It's insane. And I would love to know who makes that choice because I know that it's on the position coach, but it's also got to be a staff decision as well, especially when you're struggling, but we'll see. We talked about wide receiver in the last show, so we won't go over that, but tight end, Tanner Koziel, the senior and the transfer, obviously your starter, Tucker Ashcraft, your backup. And then I think, some interesting names just because of some of the recruiting rankings that go along with them, specifically Grant Steck, along with Rob Booker. Rob barely suited up at all this year. He was dealing with something. So interested to see what it fills in behind Tucker Ashcraft.
I can see JT Seagreaves being that third guy because he was in certain situations this past season, especially if they're going to have some heavier personnel packages. I know based on how Luke has talked about what he wants and certainly what Jeff Grimes has done at previous stops, you're going to see some 12 personnel and maybe even 13 personnel. And when they did that, Seagreaves was on the field. Now, Jackson McGowan is a bit of a wild card here. How much growth has he made in this offseason? Certainly they brought him in to be more of a pass catching type. And Grant Steck, to me, the physicality is there. Maybe with the year under his belt, he can work his way into the rotation. But if you're going to play more tight ends in this system, it seems like he can take advantage of that opportunity.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, so offensive line. Rapid fire for me here.
Well, I'll just give you who my starting 5 are, at least projected. Kevin Haywood, to me, steps into the left tackle spot occupied previously by Jack Nelson. You have Joe Brunner coming back at left guard. You have Jake Renfro coming back at center. Obviously, Riley Mahlman's coming back at right tackle. I'm putting JP Benchwall into the starting right guard spot. He's been here for 4 years, but they've got those 10 scholarship guys in the last 2 recruiting classes, or 9, or however many it is. And some of those guys in year 2 are going to have a really good opportunity, like in Emerson Mandel. I think they've got a lot of different options. Barrett Nelson is still here. Leighton Nelson didn't play last season, but played for AJ Blazik briefly or sparingly at Vanderbilt. They have a lot of choices. They have 16 scholarship offensive linemen. So that is one room that they are not hurting for bodies. And that's why they didn't go anywhere in the transfer portal. They've got enough guys. It's a high quality room, I think.
They didn't lose anybody either, right?
Well, they lost James Durand, but other than that, they don't have Joe Huber. But
I mean, in terms of like the portal, guys didn't head out, which usually, that's a good thing.
Yeah,
it's a good thing.
I mean, look, if you're going to build your offense around a line, I think you've got to feel pretty good about what they have coming back.
Yeah, it's a good start. I shouldn't say it's a good start. It's a good building block because you have 3 of your starters back, and then you potentially have a veteran in Benchall who hasn't played a ton. Did end up playing more in the Minnesota game when Renfro got benched, but then which I think was injury related. And then obviously Kevin Haywood played as a true freshman, not a ton, but played enough. And you don't necessarily always get that when you're an offensive lineman at Wisconsin. Getting to play as a true freshman doesn't happen very often. So, yeah, I like the starting group, but I think the depth there could be pretty impressive if all those guys come along. I'm really excited to see Emerson Mandel. The dude is a absolute wrecker when it comes to run blocking. I feel like he's a better fit at guard than he is at tackle, but I guess we'll see exactly where they want to put him. But
right, he earned like 15 snaps at right tackle, where the only snaps that he got were at tackle. But obviously, I see his long-term future at guard. And those last 2 classes, there's a lot of quality there. I mean, even a guy like Ryan Corey looks like he might be the backup center in the future at that position. So that I have a lot of questions about what that rotation looks like, and we'll see in spring practice.
We will. It feels like they're going to have enough offensive lines for 3 groups, though, or enough offensive linemen for 3 groups. They're not going to have to bring in tryout players for to fill out a 3rd group, which they had to do last year. And I guess Manny Mullins did also go to the transfer portal, so hand up on my part. I apologize about that. He was part of the offensive line, so my bad. All right, we'll be back later this week. I think we're gonna maybe do some grades for Luke Fickell and his staff, and just the Luke Fickell era here these first 2+ years now as we get further here into January and things slow down a little bit. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach.
All right, there he is. Jesse Temple from The Athletic. You've been listening to The Camp.